Shout out to the wonderful folks who donate to the show on Patreon. You are what makes this show possible. I want to recognize Tucker and Lily for becoming new patrons this week. Thank you so much, friends. I love you to pieces. Quick note at the top here, there is a quick reference to suicide in this episode. My name is Callie Wright, and this is Queersplaining. I live right on the border of Ohio and Kentucky, and I actually live in northern Kentucky, and until about 2 weeks ago, I worked in southwestern Ohio, so I cross the state lines every day, and neither state actually has statewide anti-discrimination policies for queer and trans folks. And even when those policies are in place at the legal level or at the corporate level, we all know that policy and implementation of policy are two different things, right? And discrimination in the workplace also doesn't have to be as obvious as, hey, you're trans, we don't like that, you're fired. And that was the position I found myself in a little over 4 years ago. I was working for a small company doing home theater, distributed audio video, networking, security, surveillance, and so on. I'd been out to my friends for nearly a year, but I knew things at work would have to move more slowly than in the rest of my life, but I wasn't anticipating a year. I came out to my boss via email. We stayed super busy. We were always running around in panic mode to get things done from day to day. So I sent him an email and just told him that I had something important to tell him and that we needed to talk when he could spare some time. In my email, I told my boss that I was transgender and that I was starting the process to transition. Now, we worked in an industry that catered to mostly super wealthy clients who were pretty universally conservative. And I told my boss that I understood this would put him in a tough position, right? My boss wasn't a rich guy. He ran a company that consisted of all of 4 people, and losing clients would very directly impact his ability to feed his family. He wasn't some faceless corporate entity sitting on billions and billions and billions of dollars. And I told him that if he thought it would be best, that I'd just quit. I would help him hire and train my replacement, and I would leave quietly. I wasn't trying to turn him into an activist or turn his business into activism. And there was no doubt in my mind that lots of our clients probably wouldn't even let me back in their houses after I came out. And that's to say nothing of the mega homophobic and sexist contractors we dealt with on these big house construction sites. But my boss told me no. He told me that I was too valuable to lose. He said he needed some time, but we'd figure something out. And he dangled all kinds of cool stuff in my face to give me hope. I loved the industry I was working in, so I wanted to stay if I could. And he told me that he was thinking about moving someone into more of a management type position so he could do what he did best and just sell systems. And he was thinking about hiring someone to build out quotes and plan systems and do the programming and handle the office work. And that kind of stuff was my strength anyway. So he said he thought it would be cool to have me in that role. And we set up 3 or 4 different meetings to talk about it. All of them got canceled for some fire that one of us had to go put out. A client wasn't happy with a thing. A system broke somewhere. We had to go repair it. Last minute consult call and so on. And eventually we were approaching a year. My mental health was in the tank. I was completely unprepared for the emotional toll of being 2 different people each day. I'd wake up and go to work as my old self, and then I'd change clothes, put on makeup, and go out with friends as my true self. And that constant push and pull between those extremes was wrenching. When the weekends were over, I'd shake and cry while I was laying out my work clothes, and I'd brace myself for all the times I'd hear the wrong name and pronouns. And it just got worse. The more and more my friends got to know and accept me as Callie, it started to feel normal to be Callie. That other person was the stranger, and I had to pretend to be him for 8 or 10 hours a day. And it went less and less well for me the longer it went on. One day I came to work and I told my boss, look, this is going to kill me. We've got to figure something out or I'm going to have to move on. And this wasn't like a flex or a power move or anything like that. It was just a recognition that I was not healthy and I needed a change to get healthy. And he agreed that we'd put it off for too long, and we just implemented the arrangement I talked about before. I'd work in the office. I got to program systems, build equipment racks, order product, do quotes, and it was awesome. And it lasted about a month. There was a project we were majorly behind on. I got the sense we were behind because my boss was procrastinating. I don't know that for sure, but he paid me a whole bunch of extra money to make an overnight drive to North Carolina to pick up some gear and drop it off at a client's house. A client's house. I wasn't supposed to be going to clients' houses anymore, but I was a team player, so I did it. And a few days later, a service call desperately needed to be ran. And then we needed help completing the system for that client we were super behind on. Just this one last project, just this one last service call. And it was never just this one last project, and it was never just this one last service call. At this point, I'd been seen on TV by a few of the contractors we worked with, and so my secret was out, even though I wasn't really interested in keeping secrets anymore. People would ask my coworkers behind my back if I was going to be their new girlfriend. Fucking hilarious, right? And it was obvious that transition was just not happening if I stayed there. So I told my boss that it had become pretty clear to me that there wasn't going to be a transition while I was here, and that I was actively looking for somewhere else to go. And by this point, there was no talk of telling me I was too valuable to lose, just keep me in the loop and let me know what's happening. And so I started to look around for jobs. I wanted insurance. I wanted a non-discrimination policy. I wanted to feel safe. And digging around on Craigslist, of all places, I found a listing for the local cable company, Tier 3 tech support, great benefits, good starting pay, and 100% on the Human Rights Campaign's Corporate Equality Index. That meant their insurance covered trans stuff. Fucking sign me up. I totally aced the phone interview, and I felt good but not great about my in-person interview, and they offered me the spot. I was ecstatic. Good insurance, good pay, good non-discrimination policy, and stability. What all of those things represented for me was stability. I'd recently ended a long-term relationship, moved out of a house we bought together, was living with my grandma, was having a terrible time with my emotional health. I was a fucking wreck. And this was the proverbial light at the end of the tunnel, right? I was stepping into stability. The possibilities were infinite, at least in theory. And then, of course, I started to think about bathrooms. At that point in my life, I was definitely being read as trans by most of the people I met, and I was terrified that someone was going to make an issue of it. I had the policy there to protect me, right? But like I said, and like we all know, policy and implementation are not the same thing. So I asked my recruiter a super embarrassing question. Was me using the women's restroom going to be a problem? And my recruiter didn't actually know. She told me that she'd reach out to someone in HR and that they'd come talk to me on my first day. Moment of truth time, right? And sure enough, we got through orientation, and one of the supervisors took me aside and walked me over to the HR building. And that's where I met Tina. Tina was a very kindly lady with the sort of calm confidence that I wish that I had at the time. And she told me the recruiter had emailed her to ask her my question about bathrooms, and she wanted to talk to me face to face. And she was so sweet. She said, "This is nothing new to us. You're not the first trans person to work here. It's absolutely not a problem for you to use the women's restroom if that's what you're comfortable doing. And if someone decides to make it a problem, you drop what you're doing, you come find me, and it will stop being a problem immediately." And I spent some time talking to her about what happened at my previous job. And as an HR professional and just as a human being in general, she was pretty disgusted. She took her time sort of mothering me and letting me know that this was a safe place for me to work. I cried really hard, and I don't know for sure, but I'm fairly certain that I saw her crying with me, and that was powerful. I felt safer, maybe not entirely safe. Like, the head of HR for the building is obviously not someone I'm going to be working with directly on a day-to-day basis, but holy shit, what a great first day. And then training starts, and I met Dan. And Dan he's the kind of guy that I don't feel like I could really put him into words. Dan's the kind of guy they make a movie like Forrest Gump out of. He's just done everything in life. He's also a guy with, seriously, just a heart of gold, but wrapped in this curmudgeonly shell. He's the kind of guy that, he likes you to think that he hates everyone and everything. But realistically, there were few people in the building that cared more about their people than Dan. And we spent 8 weeks with him in training, and he taught us about networking and the cable system and lots about life. And his philosophy was always just treat your customers like you're taking care of my mom. Take care of Dan's mom. That was the mantra. And he gave us this speech one day, and he was talking about how sometimes people on the phones can get under your skin. And at this point in my life, my relationship with my grandma was ending, and I was hurting a lot. And Dan was talking about people on the phones, and he was making a speech that kind of boiled down to that, people on the phones are only going to get under your skin if you let them. And like, we can unpack that, right? Because there's some truth there. There are some people who are just so cruel that it hurts. But what I heard him saying was that my feelings about grandma were my fault, that I was hurting because I chose to hurt. And of course, that's not what he was saying. But because of what I was going through in my life at that point, that's what I heard. So we broke for lunch, and I spent the entirety of my lunch in my car crying over my McDonald's. And he walked by and he could see that I was upset, but he kept going. When we came back, it was time for most of the class to retake some exams that they had failed. I was actually the only one in the class that didn't have a test to retake, humble brag. So Dan asked me to join him in this back room off to the side of our training room. And he asked me if he'd said something that upset me. And so I was just honest with him. I told him what I was going through and where I was in life. And I was not at all expecting what he told me. He told me about a time in his life when he was contemplating suicide. And he's not the most delicate of communicators. Basically, he's like, well, there's lots of times in my life when I had a shotgun ready to put in my mouth. But he gave me a real sincere, honest-to-goodness apology and told me that he'd take care of a motherfucker personally if anyone at work ever gave me problems. Dan was God in my department, and it was then that I really started to feel like I was safe. Dan was God in my department, and it was then that I really started to feel safe. If Dan was for me, fuck anyone who was against me. And at the risk of bragging on myself a little bit, I got really good at my job really fast. And all I ever really wanted was to work in a place where two things mattered. One, how do you treat the people around you? And two, are you working hard to learn and be better? And I was shocked to find myself in a place where those were the things that mattered most. If you didn't hit your numbers, but you were at least improving, good to go. Make a lot of mistakes, as long as you learn from them and don't repeat them, good to go. Do you treat people with respect and kindness? Good to go. For the first time in my life since my childhood, I felt safe and I was stable. I was able to get my bariatric surgery. I was able to get my bottom surgery. I was able to take a week off, no big deal. When Celeste's stepdad passed away, I was recognized by my peers, my supervisors, my managers, and even corporate once. I got promoted twice and eventually became a supervisor. I was doing okay. I got to play roller derby even though I worked second shift because my manager cares about me as a person. She worked a system out with me so I could get my work done and still have time to play. Dan even threw a party for Celeste and I when we got married. I'd always had getting drunk with Dan on my bucket list, and I finally got to do it. He had 2 bride wedding cake toppers on the table at his house for the party, and he was so proud of himself. He was kind of shocked, I guess, to find out that they didn't sell gay sets of wedding cake toppers at the store he went to, so he just bought 2 sets. And he had the most wonderful shit-eating grin on his face when he told me that. It was adorable, and I'm kind of crying now just remembering that. I bought 2 sets. So good. And February 7th started out like any normal day. Actually, it started off as a better than normal day. I'd been kind of behind on my work for a few weeks. Long story short, they had, chosen this new metric that they really wanted us to work on, and our call center was doing a bad job. And so they were coming down hard on us for that. But the day before, I had almost entirely caught up. Thursday was the last work day of the week for me. I had 3 calls to listen to, and I was done with my list of things like you got to get done for the week. And I'd planned to spend the rest of my day just figuring out who needed some extra help and writing up some action plans. Pretty easy day. Listen to some calls, sling a few spreadsheets, run a few reports, and then enjoy my weekend. I was at my desk talking with one of my managers, and he made a joke that he was just going to sit there and watch me work all day. And I made a joke about how bored he was going to be. But, you're welcome to do that if that's how you want to spend your day. And he mentioned that the building vice president was walking around the floor. And this VP was a pretty cool guy, as far as I knew. His Jeep had a Trogdor license plate, which was kind of cool. And he'd stopped coming around for a while, I guess, because the department upstairs was busy enough that occupied most of his time. So it was a little odd, but not unheard of for him to be walking around on our floor. floor. He was weaving in and out of the offices our HR people worked in, and that was only mildly unusual. I thought to myself, there was probably some kind of drama happening with some of the folks upstairs, and I just sort of shrugged it off. And we knew we were getting a visit from some outside VPs that day. And again, not weird. They'd visit once or twice a quarter. We'd do like a meeting or a focus group, make some boring small talk for a bit, and then just move on with our day. And my manager was like, oh, yeah, hey, the gang's here. We got to go do our meeting. And so I wished him, have fun with all of that. And I got to work listening to the calls I was going to listen to. And it couldn't have been more than 20 or 30 minutes later, my other manager came out to the floor, and she looked kind of down, but the higher ups had been beating them down pretty hard. So I didn't think much of it. They'd probably just had a really frustrating conversation. And she grabbed me and another supervisor I was talking with and told us that we had a meeting and we needed to go to the training room. And at this point, I'm thinking, oh, like we're probably going to do a focus group, or they're probably going to yell at us about some metric we need to improve or something like that. So I walk in, I sit down, the few VPs in the room, no big deal. Then the director of HR walked in. And that's when I thought to myself, gosh, we are getting bad news today, friends. Something is going to go wrong today. And there had been talk for some time of our tech support department being switched over to being a billing call center. And so I thought that might be what was happening. And once everyone got settled, the VP that I had seen the most spoke up. So we're here to tell you all about a decision that's been made, a very difficult decision that as of today, this internet voice repair site is being shut down. And she just sort of let that hang in the air for a minute. Someone spoke up, I forget who it was. As of today, like we're shutting down and going home today. And she sort of continued at 2:45, all of the call center agents will stop getting phone calls and we'll gather everyone on the floor for a meeting and make the announcement. HR is here to support you and let you know about the severance and outplacement options. You'll technically stay employees for the next 2 months, but operations here are shutting down today. And everyone was shocked, of course, but what was forefront in my mind was that I had to pee. And I was kind of worried they weren't going to let me back out on the call center floor for fear that like I'd try to start a revolution or something. And I stood up and was just sort of like, I need to use the restroom. I don't know if somebody needs to escort me or something. And they just, that's not necessary, but just please go and come straight back. We weren't supposed to leave the room until it was time to start gathering our teams for the meeting. And that was that. And so that was at about 2:15 that they told us. Our managers found out about 20 minutes before we did, and the agents found out at about 3, and I was handing in my badge and my laptop by about 3:30. Coincidentally, at about 4 p.m., I got an email from my realtor's office telling me that it looked like we were officially clear to close on the house. $140,000 in debt, and I just lost my job. Fucking cool. Super exciting. And to be clear, the severance they're giving us is pretty generous. So Celeste and I are going to be okay financially, at least in the near future. As long as I find a new job soon, we'll be okay. But it was just so fast. And given the backstory of where I was when I came to this job, it just felt like the rug being jerked out from under me. It was all being taken from me, this stability that I had fought for, because the company wanted to realign, whatever the fuck that means. My work friends were not just work friends, right? Lots of them are real friends, folks that saw me through hard times and folks that I saw through hard times, people who helped me out with regular everyday life stuff, people who made me feel safe to exist and to thrive, and it's gone. I invested so much time in getting good at that job, and lots of those skills are skills that I can't really take anywhere else. And so I feel like I wasted my time. And I know like that's not really true, but I can't help but feel that way sometimes. And as a supervisor, I led a team, right? And I went out of my way to create that kind of environment for my team and even folks who weren't on my team. I was sort of the trans mama of the department. I watched several folks come out and transition on the job there and helped several folks feel safe. I helped them with name changes and went to HR for things on their behalf, and it felt good to pay that stuff forward. That's all Dan ever told me that he wanted in return when I would get all sappy and thank him for all that he's done to me. He said, all I want to do is I want to see you thrive, and I want to see you pay it forward to other people. And so I tried so hard to do that, and I felt like I was succeeding, and that's over now, at least in that place. And now I'm left with question marks again. The tech field is notoriously hostile toward minority groups of pretty much any kind. What's a queer trans chick like me gonna face when I go out somewhere and try to start over again? I was so lucky at this last job. I really don't remember any blatant homophobia, transphobia, maybe a little sexism, but it certainly wasn't the norm and not something I had to worry about with any regularity. I know enough to know it's not like that everywhere, especially in the field that I worked in. And what about my trans friends that I worked with? I had tenure there, and I was a supervisor. Those things look great on a resume. I had a friend who just started after leaving another job because of being treated like shit for being trans, and I was able to help her feel safe. And now she has to start over again. At least I had time to get my paperwork in order, right? She and a few others that I knew there hadn't had the ability to get their legal name changes completed yet. So what are they gonna do? Put a suit and tie back on for an interview somewhere else, then come out all over again to their new employer with all of the uncertainty and fear that comes along with that after just getting settled in here? I put my resume together a few nights ago, and it just brought a flood of emotions back to me. Like, my heart started racing. I was sweating. I was panicking. Like, what if I interview with some sexist asshole or some homophobic, transphobic asshole? What if I don't find a safe place to land this time? I'm married now. I'm about to sign the dotted line on a fucking mortgage. And on top of all of that, I have to learn how to navigate an entirely new workplace culture where they may very well see my queerness or transness first. How many jobs will I go through because of that? I imagine the interview question, tell me why you left your last job. Lack of opportunity for advancement, and then whisper softly under my breath because men in tech don't like lesbians who know as much as they do or more. And look, I fully acknowledge that I may be blowing my fears out of proportion here. In fact, that's a thing I know I do a lot, but for some reason that knowledge isn't making me feel any better. I sent out a resume for a position the other night, and when that phone rings, my blood is going to run cold. Thankfully, I've been handed the privilege of being able to fake not feeling that way, so I'm sure I'll muddle through, but I'm still not looking forward to it at all. Thanks for listening, friend. If you want to help support the show, share this episode around to your friends. You'll find social media posts on Twitter at Queersplaining, on Facebook.com/Queersplaining, and on my Instagram feed at CallieGetsIt. Every share helps. You can also check out Patreon.com/Queersplaining to help support the show financially and help me keep telling my stories and our stories. Before we go, I want you to know that if you're lost, you're hurting, you're scared, if you feel like no one cares and no one understands, you need to know there's a community out here that loves you, cares for you, knows that you're capable of amazing things, and that you are worthy of love. If you're struggling, please don't be afraid to reach out. Until next time, friends, this is Queersplaining.